The streets of Washington, D.C. glistened beneath the glow of amber streetlights, slick with the steady drizzle of summer rain. It was close to midnight, and the city carried an uneasy stillness, the kind that hinted at an approaching storm. From a sleek black SUV stepped Dr. Aisha Coleman. At 42, she radiated the kind of authority that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Her shoulders were squared, her steps deliberate, and her gaze sharp, cutting through the shadows around her. The tailored navy suit she wore was as composed as she wasn't bothered by the late hour, unwrinkled by the damp air. Aisha Coleman wasn't just another professional woman returning home from a long day. She was the first black woman ever to serve as director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a position that carried power, weight, and constant scrutiny. For decades she had learned how to move through rooms where she was doubted, dismissed, or underestimated, always proving that she belonged. But tonight, her mind wasn't on her title or the invisible battles she fought daily. It was on something far simpler, the Thai takeout waiting on the passenger seat of her car, and the rare opportunity she had carved out to spend the evening at home, catching up on the never-ending stack of classified reports on her desk that as she locked the car and set out toward her Georgetown brownstone, her heels clicked against the wet pavement, echoing through the upscale, quiet neighborhood. Aisha thought it would be an ordinary night. As Aisha rounded the corner of her quiet Georgetown street, the familiar serenity of the neighborhood fractured in an instant. Flashing red and blue lights pulsed against the wet pavement, reflecting in distorted streaks on the slick asphalt. Two police cruisers sat diagonally across the road, their sirens silent but their authority impossible to miss. A small crowd had gathered, most of them with phones raised, their screens glowing faintly in the humid air. Aisha slowed, instincts sharpening. Years of law enforcement experience had trained her to notice the details, the tension in the officers' postures, the way the bystanders shifted uncomfortably, the sound of murmurs layered with occasional shouts. Her eyes locked on the center of the commotion, a young black man, barely out of his teens, pressed flat against the hood of one of the cruisers. His wrists were cuffed behind him, his body rigid with fear. Three uniformed officers encircled him like predators, one barking orders while the other two loomed in silence, their presence a silent reminder of who held the power. Aisha's stomach tightened. The boy's face was a mask of equal parts fear and defiance, his voice low but steady as he tried to answer their questions. She had seen this scene play out too many times before, not just as an FBI agent, but as a black woman moving through America. It was always the same, a young man criminalized before he even spoke, his dignity stripped under the weight of suspicion. The crowd, restless and unsettled, voiced their disapproval in different ways. Some shouted angrily at the officers, demanding they release him. Others muttered quietly to themselves, anxious but unwilling to step closer. Many simply recorded, knowing that video evidence might be the only shield against lies and manipulation. Later, Aisha's first instinct was to keep walking. She was the director of the FBI, a position that required caution and discretion in public. Getting involved in a local arrest, whatever it was, could complicate matters unnecessarily. Her role was supposed to transcend neighborhood disputes, and she had learned long ago that even good intentions could be twisted into accusations of bias or abuse of power. But then the lead officer's voice cut through the damp night air. "Stop moving, or you're going to regret it." The words froze her in place. The young man wasn't moving at all, his shoulders were stiff. His head turned just enough to glance at the crowd. His eyes darted desperately from one face to another, searching for help that never seemed to come. It was the kind of moment Aisha knew all too well, where fear could spiral into tragedy in the blink of an eye. Her body acted before her mind had time to argue. With her leather bag slung across her shoulder and her badge tucked safely in her pocket, Aisha crossed the street. Her heels clicked against the wet concrete, each step deliberate, cutting through the tension that gripped the block. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice calm but firm. The single word sliced through the haze of noise, drawing the attention of officers and civilians alike. The lead cop, a stocky man with a buzz cut and a square jaw, turned to face her. His name tag read Brandt. His eyes narrowed as he sized her up, and his hand instinctively shifted to rest on the butt of his holstered weapon. "Ma'am," he said coldly, "this is a police matter." "Step back. I'm just asking what's happening here," Aisha replied evenly. Her gaze flicked to the boy, who had lifted his eyes toward her with a silent plea. "He doesn't appear to be resisting. What's the charge?" Brandt's jaw flexed. "I said, step back. You're interfering with an arrest." Aisha held her ground, her expression steady. She had stared down cartel bosses, white-collar criminals, even corrupt politicians who thought themselves untouchable. A local officer's bravado didn't shake her. "I'm a concerned citizen," she said, her voice still calm. "I have a right to know why you're detaining him." The second officer, younger, with a nervous edge in his movements, piped up quickly. "Ma'am, you need to leave. If you don't, you're going to be in trouble too." His words were shaky, as though even he wasn't fully convinced of them. The crowd stirred, murmuring louder, some raising their voices to insist that she stay. Dozens of phones pointed in her direction now, recording not only the officers but her intervention. Aisha felt the weight of their expectations settle onto her shoulders. They wanted her to do something, to stand against what they knew was wrong. She slipped a hand into her pocket, reaching for her badge not to flaunt her position, but to de-escalate, to put a swift end to the confrontation before it spiraled further. Yet before the leather wallet cleared the fabric, Brandt lunged forward. "Don't reach for anything," he barked, seizing her wrist with a grip like iron. He twisted her arm behind her back, forcing her against the cold metal of the cruiser. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Aisha's cheek pressed against the wet surface of the car, her breath catching not from pain, but from the sheer audacity of it. "Let go of me," she said, her voice low, controlled, dangerous. But Brandt wasn't listening. "Stop resisting," he shouted, his words for the crowd and the cameras, though Aisha hadn't moved a muscle. His forearm pressed against her neck, pinning her in place. The second officer rushed to help, grabbing her other arm, while the third hovered a few steps back, unease flickering in his eyes but saying nothing. The murmurs of the crowd erupted into shouts. "She's not resisting. Let her go." Phones angled higher, capturing every second. Aisha felt the burn of injustice coursing through her veins, the same burn she had fought her entire life. The one that had propelled her through barriers meant to keep her out. She could have fought back. Her training made it easy. She knew exactly how to free herself and incapacitate Brandt in seconds. But she also knew better. Any resistance, no matter how justified, would be twisted against her. Her voice cut through the noise, steady despite the pressure at her throat. "Get your hands off me." Brandt leaned in closer, his breath hot against her ear. "You think you're tough, huh? Keep talking, and you'll be in cuffs too." Pinned against the cruiser, Aisha's eyes flicked toward the boy still standing, shackled just feet away. His wide eyes were no longer filled only with fear. There was something else now. Hope that someone, finally, was standing up for him. Aisha made her decision in that heartbeat. "I'm not resisting," she said loudly, clearly enough for the cameras and the crowd to hear. "I am Director Aisha Coleman, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Release me and this young man immediately." The words detonated like thunder in the humid night. The humid night held its breath. For a long second, the world seemed to freeze as Aisha's words echoed through the street. "Director Aisha Coleman, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The crowd fell into a stunned silence before erupting into cheers, gasps, and frantic commentary. The chant began almost immediately, voices surging over the patter of rain. "Let her go. Let them go." Officer Brandt's arm was still wedged against her throat, but his posture faltered. Disbelief flickered across his face, quickly hardening into a scowl. "Yeah, right," he sneered, but the edge in his voice was gone. His bravado cracked under the weight of uncertainty. The younger officer, Daniels, hesitated, his grip on her wrist loosening. He looked pale, his eyes darting between the furious crowd and the woman he had just manhandled. The third officer, Carter, stepped back altogether, his unease written plainly in the tightness of his jaw and the way his hands hovered awkwardly at his sides. "You got ID to back that up?" Brandt demanded, though the challenge sounded hollow. Aisha's eyes locked on his unwavering. She didn't dignify his skepticism with words. Instead, she gave a sharp nod to Daniels, who nervously reached into her pocket where she'd been heading moments earlier. He pulled out the leather wallet and flipped it open under the glaring wash of the cruiser's headlights. The golden FBI seal gleamed in the night. Undeniable. A photo ID accompanied the credentials, the bold print under it leaving no room for doubt. Aisha Coleman, Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Daniels' face drained of color. Oh God," he muttered under his breath. Brandt stumbled back as though burned, his arm dropping from her neck. For the first time that night, he looked smaller, his swagger shrinking in the glare of the truth. The murmur of the crowd swelled into shouts, cheers, and jeers, the sound of 100 voices crashing down on him. Phones tilted higher, capturing the look on his face as power slipped from his grasp. Aisha straightened slowly, brushing invisible wrinkles from her navy suit. Her gaze never left Brandt's face. Every movement radiated control, discipline, and the quiet fury of a woman who had endured enough. "Uncuff him," she said, her voice steady but laced with steel. She nodded toward the young man still pressed against the cruiser. Now it wasn't a request. For a heartbeat, Brandt didn't move, his jaw clenched, his pride warring with the undeniable reality of who he had just assaulted. But Carter reacted first. He rushed to the boy's side, fumbling with the handcuffs. The metal clicked open, and Marcus rubbed his wrists gingerly, staring at Aisha with wide, astonished eyes. Gratitude and disbelief mingled in his expression. "You okay?" Aisha asked softly, turning her head just enough to meet his gaze. Marcus swallowed, his voice failing him, but he nodded quickly. The crowd surged closer, their voices growing louder, more triumphant. They chanted her name now, some crying out in vindication, others filming with renewed intensity. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. Where moments ago Brandt had stood dominant, now he stood frozen, reduced to a man who had revealed his prejudice to the world and been caught. "You'll be hearing from my office," Aisha said coldly, her eyes sweeping over each officer in turn. Brandt flinched at the words. Daniels looked as if he wanted to vanish, and Carter avoided her gaze altogether. She placed a steady hand on Marcus's shoulder, guiding him gently away from the cruisers. The crowd parted for them like water breaking around stone, their phones still raised, their voices a chorus of outrage and triumph. Behind her, the officers didn't move. They stood in stunned silence, shackled not by cuffs but by the crushing weight of their mistake. As Aisha led Marcus toward her parked SUV, the rain fell harder, streaking the pavement in silver ribbons. Her mind was already racing ahead to the inevitable reports, the investigations, the political firestorm waiting to ignite. But for that moment, she focused on the young man beside her. His name, she would soon learn, was Marcus. He was a college student, stopped for nothing more than looking suspicious in a neighborhood where he had every right to be. And tonight, he had come within inches of becoming another name on a list too long to bear. "You didn't have to do that," Marcus said quietly as they reached her car. His voice trembled, but it carried both awe and concern. "You could have just shown your badge from the start." Aisha paused, opening the passenger door for him. She met his gaze, her expression softening but her voice firm. "Sometimes," she said, "you have to let people show you who they really are." The words hung in the air, heavier than the storm clouds overhead. Marcus climbed into the seat, still processing what had just happened. Aisha closed the door and circled to the driver's side. Rain dripping steadily from her hairline, she knew this night would not be easily forgotten, not by her, not by Marcus, not by the officers who had overstepped so recklessly, and certainly not by the hundreds of witnesses who had captured the truth on their phones. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. A week later, the walls of FBI headquarters felt heavier than usual. The building, a fortress of glass and steel, had always symbolized resilience to Aisha. Its polished corridors lined with photographs, medals, and commemorations of decades of federal service usually filled her with quiet pride. Yet today, her office seemed smaller, the air denser, as though the weight of the entire nation's gaze pressed down upon it. The incident on the Georgetown street had exploded, far beyond what any of the officers could have imagined. Within hours, videos of the confrontation had spread across social media. By morning, they dominated national news broadcasts. Commentators repeated the same damning headline: FBI director choked by police in shocking case of mistaken identity. Systemic racism laid bare. Every platform, from X to major cable outlets, ran the story on repeat. Clips of Brandt pinning her against the cruiser, the crowd chanting, and the moment she announced her identity were dissected from every angle. It was a public relations nightmare for local law enforcement. But more than that, it was a mirror reflecting back the prejudice and abuse countless Black Americans had endured without the protection of a badge. For Aisha, it was exhausting. She had never sought personal attention, and now her face was everywhere. But she also knew she couldn't retreat. This wasn't about her pride, it was about using the platform she had to demand accountability, which was why three men now stood stiffly in front of her desk. Officers Brandt, Daniels, and Carter had been summoned to FBI headquarters at her request. Their department, under crushing public pressure, had fully cooperated. They wore crisp uniforms, but their faces betrayed nerves. Brandt's jaw tight, Daniels swallowing hard, and Carter avoiding her gaze altogether. Beside the door stood her deputy director, Tom Hargrove, a grizzled veteran whose presence carried unspoken authority. His arms were crossed, his stern expression a silent reminder that the FBI was watching. Aisha leaned forward, her hands folded on the desk. Her voice was calm, deliberate, but weighted with authority. "Gentlemen, do you understand why you're here?" No one answered. The silence stretched until it was almost unbearable. Finally, Brandt cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on the floor. "You detained an innocent young man without cause," Aisha continued, her tone sharper. "You assaulted me, the director of the FBI, because you assumed I was a threat. I want to know why." Brandt shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, we were responding to a call about suspicious activity in the area. The suspect matched the description." "The description," Aisha repeated slowly, her eyes narrowing. "Male, black, young. That's what you had, isn't it?" Brandt gave a reluctant nod. She didn't let him look away. "And when I approached asking a simple question, you decided I was a threat as well." "Why?" Daniels broke the silence, his voice shaky. "We didn't know who you were. You reached for your pocket, and we thought." He cut himself off, realizing how flimsy the excuse sounded. "You thought I was reaching for a weapon," Aisha finished for him, her words slicing through his protest. "Not because of my behavior, but because of my skin." The room went silent again, the truth hanging thick in the air. Carter finally spoke, his voice low. "I should have said something. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't act." Aisha studied him for a long moment. Her expression softened slightly, though her resolve remained. "Officer Carter, your silence made you complicit. You had a duty to intervene, and you failed." She turned her gaze back to Brandt, her tone cutting like glass. "And your actions were reckless, biased, and dangerous. You didn't just violate protocol, you violated trust. The trust of the community you serve. The trust of every person who filmed that night. The trust of a young man who deserved better." Brandt's face reddened. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. No defense left to cling to. Aisha rose from her seat, circling her desk until she stood directly before them. Her voice carried a quiet intensity, each word deliberate. This isn't just about one incident. It's about a system that allows incidents like this to happen over and over again. I've spent my career fighting for justice, climbing through a world that told me I didn't belong. And I'm still here not because I was lucky, but because I refuse to let people like you define me. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. You are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Your department will receive my recommendations for retraining and policy reform. And let me be clear, this isn't punishment. This is accountability. If you want to wear that badge, you need to earn it every single day. The three officers exchanged uneasy glances. None spoke. They filed out silently, their heads bowed, leaving behind only the lingering echo of Aisha's authority. When the door closed, Hargrove raised an eyebrow. You went easy on them, he said gruffly, half joking. Aisha shook her head, sinking back into her chair. This isn't about them, Tom. It's about Marcus. It's about every kid like him. If I don't use this moment to push for change, then what's the point of being here? The rest of her week blurred into a whirlwind of meetings, press briefings, and calls from lawmakers demanding answers. Aisha handled each with steady composure, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Marcus. She had checked on him every day since the incident, making sure he had support and connecting him with a mentor from a local youth program. Slowly, the young man had opened up, sharing his dream of becoming a lawyer, his fears that the arrest would define his future. Aisha had promised it wouldn't. She meant every word that evening. She drove to a community center in Southeast DC, invited to speak at a town hall. The auditorium was packed, residents, activists, reporters all buzzing with questions. When she took the podium, the room hushed. I'm not here as the FBI director tonight, she began, her voice steady, clear. I'm here as Aisha Coleman, a black woman who has lived the reality to many of you know. What happened last week wasn't just an attack on me. It was an attack on every person who's been profiled, harassed, or dismissed because of their skin. Applause thundered, but Aisha raised a hand, silencing it. This isn't about applause. It's about action. We need better training, stronger oversight, real accountability. But more than that, we need to listen to kids like Marcus. We need to hear the communities crying out for change. I am committing my office to work with you, to rebuild trust, to make sure no one else has to go through what we did. In the crowd, Aisha spotted Marcus sitting beside his mother. Both watched her with pride and gratitude. Her throat tightened, but she pushed through, her voice unwavering. The town hall stretched late into the night, filled with questions, stories, and demands. Each one reminded Aisha why she had fought so hard to reach this place, and why she could never back down when it ended. Marcus approached, his eyes alight with determination. You meant it, he said softly. About change. Aisha smiled, resting a hand on his shoulder. I always mean it, Marcus. And I'm not doing this alone. You're part of it now. He nodded, a spark of purpose glowing in his eyes. As Aisha stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The night air was sharp, clear, as if the storm had broken. She knew the fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hope, not just for herself, but for the future she was helping to shape. The town hall had ended, but its energy lingered long after the crowd dispersed. The community center's auditorium buzzed with a kind of electricity that could not be contained within four walls. Residents clustered in small groups, still talking about what they had heard, replaying Aisha's words to one another as if trying to hold on to the conviction she carried in her voice. For Aisha, the night was both draining and invigorating. She had spent hours answering questions, listening to personal stories of profiling, harassment, and injustice, stories she already knew all too well, but never dismissed. Every testimony was a reminder of why she had chosen this path, why she had accepted the burdens of her role, even when it came with constant scrutiny and sacrifice. She spotted Marcus and his mother again near the back of the room. They had remained after most had left, their expressions still glowing with pride. Marcus walked toward her, his movements hesitant but purposeful, like someone stepping into a role they weren't sure they were ready for. When he stopped in front of her, his voice was quiet but firm. You meant it, he said, searching her face. About change. Aisha placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him with the same calm presence she had shown that night in Georgetown. I always mean it, Marcus, and I'm not doing this alone. You're part of it now. His eyes widened, a spark igniting behind them. For the first time, she saw not just fear or gratitude in him, but determination. It was the same fire she had carried as a young woman, fighting to prove herself in a world that doubted her. Marcus was beginning to see that his story didn't have to be defined by fear. It could be reshaped into strength, into purpose. They walked together toward the exit, the last voices of the evening fading behind them. Outside, the air smelled of wet earth and pavement, cleansed by the earlier storm. The rain had stopped, leaving the night unusually clear, the city lights reflecting in crisp lines instead of blurred streaks. It felt symbolic to Aisha. as though the storm had passed and the horizon, though still fraught with challenges, was momentarily brighter. For years, she had fought battles in conference rooms and courtrooms, across briefing tables and in covert operations. But tonight reminded her that leadership wasn't only about strategy or enforcement. It was also about being present, listening, and standing as proof that change was possible. As they approached her car, Marcus broke the silence. You didn't have to put yourself at risk that night. You could have just flashed your badge, and it all would have been over. Aisha unlocked the SUV, then turned to face him fully. Her expression softened. Sometimes, she said, you have to let people show you who they are. If I had stepped in with authority right away, all anyone would have seen was an FBI director pulling rank. But by waiting, the world saw something else. They saw how quick some people are to strip away dignity without reason, and now, no one can deny it. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding dawning on him. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He had become part of the story, a symbol of why the fight mattered. Aisha opened the passenger door for him once more. The same gesture she had made that first night. This time, though, Marcus climbed in, not with fear but with a sense of purpose. He wasn't just being protected. He was being invited into the movement. As she slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, Aisha allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The road ahead would be long, filled with resistance, politics, and backlash. Reform never came easily, and the forces against it were strong. But she wasn't deterred. The viral video, the public outcry, and the faces she had seen at the town hall had all made one thing clear. People were ready to fight alongside her. She glanced at Marcus, who stared out the window with a thoughtful expression. He was young, but in his eyes she saw the beginnings of a leader. Maybe a lawyer, maybe an activist, maybe something else entirely. Whatever path he chose, his experience would shape him, and if she could help, he would never face it alone. The SUV rolled through the quiet streets of Southeast DC, headlights cutting through the damp night. For the first time in weeks, Aisha felt a sense of peace settle over her chest. Hope, not naive or fleeting, but grounded. Hard-won hope. The storm had passed, but the fight was far from over. She knew tomorrow would bring new challenges: media scrutiny, political battles, entrenched systems unwilling to change. Yet tonight, walking out of the community center with Marcus at her side, she felt the future had shifted, however slightly. She had always carried the weight of justice on her shoulders, but now, she carried something else alongside it. The knowledge that she wasn't carrying it alone, that, and for the first time in a long time, Aisha Coleman believed not just in her own resilience, but in the possibility of lasting change.